My name is Flora Whitmore. I'm 30 years old. I used to believe that family was the safest place in the world, the one circle where betrayal could never exist. But looking back, maybe I was just naive. Maybe I ignored the warning signs because admitting the truth was too painful. My parents are in their 60s now. Dad has been clinging to a failing business for years, some kind of supply company that hasn't turned a profit since I was in college. I'd begged him countless times to shut it down, but he'd always wave me off with a stubborn glare, muttering, "A Whitmore never quits." Mom never challenged him. She stood at his side, nodding, smiling weakly, her loyalty disguised as love, but really just submission. Then there's Gina, my younger sister, 24, still living in the shadow of Dad's doomed company. She was supposed to be his successor, the golden child who would inherit the business. I watched them hand her that future like it was some glorious gift, even though I knew it was a sinking ship. Over the years, I had paid for her tuition, her car, even her medical bills once. Every time they promised to pay me back, and every time I convinced myself it might be different. It never was. Sometimes I think I wasn't just stupid for believing them. I wanted to believe them because believing otherwise meant facing that my family didn't see me as a daughter or sister, but as a wallet. About a month ago, the storm finally broke. I remember sitting in their living room, a space that still looked like a showroom, only because I had filled it with nice things. Leather couches, stainless steel appliances, a television so big it barely fit the wall. Mom started sobbing, her face red and blotchy, while Dad clutched his chest like he was on the verge of a heart attack. "Flora, we need your help," Mom pleaded, her voice breaking. "The bank is going to take our house." Dad added, his voice low and desperate. "We took out a second mortgage to put money back into the business, and now the bank won't give us more time." I stared around the room at all the expensive gifts I'd given them. Every object reminded me of a sacrifice I'd made money I could have spent building my own life. "How much?" I asked flatly. Dad's eyes flickered with shame. 50,000 on the mortgage. And 75,000 I owe to my business partner. Mom let out another wail, pressing a tissue to her face. "We'll be on the street, Flora. Please, please help us." I remember sitting there in silence, feeling my pulse in my temples. I was tired of being the family's safety net, tired of throwing money into a pit that never filled. But I couldn't ignore the picture they painted my parents homeless, their lives shattered. "Fine," I said at last. My voice was steady, but my stomach was in knots. "I'll pay it all. But this time it comes with conditions." Their sobs slowed. Even Gina looked up, her expression tense. "Once I pay the debts, I continued the house deed transfers to me. You can live here for as long as you want. I'm not kicking you out, but legally it becomes mine." I expected a fight, accusations of greed, wounded pride. But to my surprise, Dad nodded almost instantly. "That's fine," he said almost too quickly. Mom's tears stopped like someone had flipped a switch. She smiled, actually smiled. "Thank you, Flora. You're saving our lives." Something in their reaction unsettled me. It was too easy, too smooth, like they had rehearsed this moment. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw Gina glance at Mom with something more than relief, something closer to anticipation. But I pushed the unease away. I wanted to believe this was finally the turning point, that my family would learn gratitude and I'd finally secure something for myself. The following week, I went with them to the bank. I wrote checks until my hand cramped, paid off every cent of their debts, and signed the paperwork that transferred the deed into my name. For the first time, the house I grew up in was legally mine. "You can stay here forever," I told them, clutching the papers with shaking hands. "Just don't make me regret this." Dad clapped me on the shoulder like he'd just closed a business deal. Mom kissed my cheek. Gina hugged me, her grip oddly tight. I tried to smile, but something cold coiled inside me. I told myself it was just exhaustion, that the unease was in my head. I had no idea I'd just signed the contract for the worst betrayal of my life. The very next day, I left for Seattle. It was supposed to be a routine business trip, a week-long conference for my marketing job. I remember feeling oddly light on the flight there, like I'd finally unshackled myself. My parents were safe, their house secure, and for once I thought maybe they'd let me breathe. That night I checked into my hotel. I unpacked neatly ordered room service and let myself sink into the soft white sheets. For the first time in months, I felt calm. Then my phone buzzed. The subject line of the email made my blood run cold. Urgent signature required for house sale, closing in 30 days. I blinked, certain it was spam. But when I opened it, my parents' address was right there in bold. The document claimed the house was under contract with a buyer and they only needed my signature, the legal owner's signature, to finalize the deal. My hands started to tremble so hard I nearly dropped the phone. This had to be a mistake. I had just refinanced the house last week. The deed was mine. Selling wasn't even on the table. I reread the email 3 times, my chest tightening with each pass. No, it wasn't a mistake. It was a transaction in progress with my childhood home listed at a price so low it felt like a clearance item. I dialed the number in the email. My heart hammered in my ears. Pinnacle Properties, this is Mike speaking. Hi, this is Flora Whitmore. I think there's been some kind of mistake. I just got an email about a sale, but I never agreed to sell my house. I rattled off my parents' address. A pause. Then his calm voice. Oh yes, your parents listed that property with us yesterday. We already have a buyer lined up, but since the deed's in your name, we'll need your signature. My stomach dropped. The room spun. What do you mean they listed it yesterday? I only became the owner last week. Another pause, this one heavier. Well, they've been preparing for this for about 3 months. They told us that once their mortgage was paid, they'd move forward immediately. 3 months, I repeated, my voice cracking. The word echoed in my skull. 3 months ago, they were already planning to sell, even before they asked me for help. That's correct, Mike said carefully. The buyers are very eager. Can you come in this week to sign? No, my voice was sharp, rising with each word. I'm not signing anything. Cancel the sale, immediately. On the other end, silence. Then, ma'am, are you sure? Your parents seemed very... I said, cancel it, I nearly shouted. This is my house. Do not proceed. His voice faltered. I'll make a note of that, but you may want to discuss this with your parents directly. I'll do more than discuss it. I hung up before he could finish. For the next hour, I called every number I had, Mom, Dad, Gina, straight to voicemail. I tried again. Still nothing. By the 5th call, I was shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, staring at the blank wall. My chest burned like someone had poured acid into my veins. They had been planning this for months, smiling at me, hugging me, thanking me, while secretly plotting to sell the house the moment I gave them what they wanted. I couldn't stay another night here, not while my family dismantled my life back home. I called my boss. My voice barely held steady. I need to leave. There's a family emergency. He didn't ask questions. Go. Family comes first. That night I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's smile at the bank, my father's quick nod, Gina's too tight hug, like actors bowing at the end of a performance. By morning, I was on the first flight back to my city. During those 3 hours in the air, paranoia gnawed at me. Every little detail replayed the speed of their agreement, the relief on their faces, how no one even questioned the condition of transferring the deed. They hadn't been desperate, I realized. They'd been waiting for me to hand them exactly what they needed, and now they were trying to rip it away. When the plane landed, I didn't even bother going home first. I told the taxi driver to take me straight to my parents' house, but as soon as we turned down their street, my chest tightened. The driveway was empty. Both cars gone. I gripped my suitcase handle, a cold dread creeping into my bones. Something was very, very wrong. I paid the driver, dragged my suitcase up the walkway, and unlocked the front door with the key that had always fit perfectly in my hand. The moment I stepped inside, silence slammed into me. Not the cozy silence of home, but the hollow emptiness of abandonment. I froze in the doorway. The living room looked like a skeleton of itself. The plush leather couch I'd bought 2 years ago for $8,000 gone. The 65-inch television I'd given them last Christmas gone. Even the curtains were missing, as though they'd stripped the house bare of anything that had ever shined. I stumbled forward, my shoes echoing against the hardwood. The kitchen hit me like a second blow. The stainless steel refrigerator, the fancy dishwasher, the set of wine glasses I'd hand-carried from Italy vanished. Every single expensive item I'd ever given them had been erased. What remained was a sad museum of the past. An old, sagging recliner, the scratched coffee table from my childhood cabinets that still smelled faintly of mildew. It was as though time had rewound 20 years, except this wasn't nostalgia, it was theft. My throat tightened. I wanted to scream, but all that came out was a whisper. No, 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 no. Then I saw it. A single sheet of paper on the living room floor, folded once. My mother's handwriting stared back at me in slanted blue ink. Flora, we sold this house because it has always belonged to us. You had no right to claim it. We're starting a new life with Gina. Do not try to find us. Thank you for paying our debts. Mom, my knees buckled. I sank into the old recliner, the one they hadn't bothered to take. The paper trembled in my hands. My own parents had left me nothing but a thank you note. For a long time, I just sat there staring at the words until they blurred. My body felt numb, but inside my chest, something ugly boiled. Rage, disbelief, grief, all tangled into a knot I couldn't untangle. How could they? After everything I'd done, I hadn't just helped them, I'd saved them. I had offered them security, dignity, a home they could stay in forever. All they had to do was honor the deal. Instead, they had gutted the house like thieves, leaving behind only the worthless remnants and a mocking goodbye. I don't know how long I sat there. It could have been minutes or an hour. But eventually, something inside me snapped into focus. I wouldn't let them erase me so easily. I grabbed my paperwork, the deed transfer, the payoff receipts, and marched out the door. By the time I reached Pinnacle Properties, my fury had crystallized into ice. Inside, I asked for Mike. He emerged from his office surprised, but not startled. Flora. We spoke on the phone. I slammed the folder of documents onto his desk. Here's proof. The deed. The mortgage receipts. Every dollar I paid. I am the sole legal owner of that house. He flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing. Well, this changes things. They lied to you, I said, my voice low but shaking with venom. They've been planning this sale for months, and they used me to clear their debts so they could pocket the money. They were going to sell my house. Mike nodded slowly. I can see that now. They did mention wanting to move quickly. They listed it at $450,000, about $100,000 below market value. It was a good deal for the buyers. I almost laughed, a humorless, bitter sound. They were going to sell my house at a discount after draining me dry and call it a win. I'm sorry, Flora, he said. His voice was professional, but I saw pity flicker in his eyes. We'll cancel the sale immediately. Without your signature, it can't go through anyway. Good. Put it in writing. I want official documentation that this deal is dead. He nodded, already reaching for his keyboard. As I turned to leave, the weight of it pressed down again. My family hadn't just betrayed me in the heat of desperation. They had plotted this for months, smiling at me, hugging me, rehearsing their gratitude while sharpening the knife. I walked out of that office shaking but clear-eyed. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was betrayal calculated and cold. When I left the realtor's office, I drove straight back to the house. My house. The silence inside still weighed heavy, but now it felt different, like a battlefield after the enemy has fled. I sat on the floor of my childhood bedroom, scrolling aimlessly on my phone, trying to make sense of the chaos. Out of habit, I opened Instagram. And there it was, glowing on my screen like a cruel joke. Gina's profile. The newest post was time-stamped only hours ago. A photo of my parents and Gina standing in front of a sprawling villa lined with palm trees. Their smiles stretched wide, sunglasses, gleaming sun kissing their skin. The caption read, "Living it up in Florida. Rented this amazing villa. Soon we'll own it after we sell our old place back home. Fresh start. Family first." I stared at the screen, unable to breathe. My parents, my broke, desperate, sobbing parents, were sipping cocktails by a pool while I sat in an empty shell of a home I'd just saved. A laugh burst out of me, sharp and broken. I imagined their faces when they realized the sale had been canceled, that their little con had collapsed. The thought gave me a fleeting, bitter satisfaction. But almost immediately, the laughter dissolved into something heavier. My throat burned, my chest tightened. These weren't strangers. They were my parents. The people who'd once tucked me into bed, held my hand, crossing the street, celebrated my graduations. Now they were grinning in a villa, celebrating the success of a scam that had failed only because I stood in their way. I felt sick. That night my phone buzzed relentlessly. First it was Dad. Flora, call me immediately. There's been a mistake. Then Mom. Why can't we sell the house? The realtor says you're refusing. What's going on? Then Gina, blunt as ever. What the hell, Flora? The deal's falling apart. We're stuck here with no money. Call me now. Message after message, their desperation dripping through the screen. I typed the same reply to each of them scammers. Then I hit block. The silence afterward was deafening. I stood in the living room, the walls echoing with emptiness, and pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window. For the first time in my life, I'd cut them off completely. The house felt eerie, stripped bare, not just of furniture, but of history. Every corner whispered memories. Christmas mornings, birthday cakes, family arguments that ended with laughter. But now all of it was poisoned. I curled up in the old armchair they hadn't taken, hugging my knees to my chest. Part of me wanted to cry to mourn the family I thought I had. Another part of me seethed with fury so hot it kept me wide awake. I stayed like that until dawn, staring at the blank ceiling, vowing I wouldn't let them through my door again. They had made their choice, and so had I. 2 days passed in silence. No calls, no texts, no knocks at the door. I thought maybe, just maybe, they had gotten the message. I was wrong. The first knock came on a Saturday morning. When I opened the door, Aunt Sarah was standing there, her lips pressed tight, her eyes carrying that familiar mixture of pity and judgment. "Flora," she said softly, "we need to talk." I didn't invite her in. Instead, I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "What did they tell you?" She hesitated, then sighed. "They said you're preventing them from selling their house, that you took it from them in exchange for helping with the debts. Flora, this house has always been theirs. Don't you think it's cruel to—" I cut her off with a sharp laugh. "Cruel. Do you want to see the receipts?" I pulled the thick folder of documents off the console table and shoved it into her hands. "That's the deed, Sarah. Signed by both of them. That's the mortgage payoff. That's the $75,000 I cleared from Dad's business partner. $125,000 my money. And all I asked was for security." She flipped through the papers, squinting at the signatures as though she were reading another language. I don't understand all this legal stuff. But morally, Flora, they're your parents. We're supposed to help our parents when they're struggling." I did help them. My voice rose despite myself. I gave them everything. And in return, they tried to steal from me. For 3 months, they plotted this. They smiled in my face while sharpening the knife behind my back. Her lips tightened. Maybe they misunderstood. No, they knew exactly what they were doing. If you can't see that, then don't stand here and lecture me about morality. The air between us grew heavy. Finally, she closed the folder and handed it back, her hands trembling. I think you'll regret this someday. Not as much as I'd regret letting them walk all over me for the rest of my life." Her eyes flickered with something pity, disappointment, maybe fear, before she turned and walked away. But Sarah wasn't the last. Over the next week, my phone lit up constantly. Uncle Mike, Cousin Lisa, Aunt Rebecca. Every relative from my mother's side had apparently received their version of the story. The script was always the same. "They're your parents. They need this money. How could you be so heartless?" At first, I tried to explain, tried to lay out the facts. But the more I defended myself, the more they seemed to dig in, as if logic couldn't compete with blood loyalty. So I stopped answering. When Lisa showed up pounding on my door, I spoke through the wood. "I'm not discussing this anymore. Please leave." She stayed for nearly an hour, alternating between shouting and begging until she finally gave up. Each encounter drained me, like they were trying to siphon off my willpower. But instead of breaking me down, it hardened me. It became clear my parents had twisted the narrative, painting me as the greedy daughter who stole their house. They'd cast themselves as victims, and my relatives had swallowed it whole. Standing at my kitchen window one night, staring at the dark yard, I whispered to myself, "They want me to feel guilty. They want me to bend, but I won't, not this time." I turned off the lights, locked the doors, and let the house fall silent around me. If my parents thought they could unleash the family mob to force my hand, they underestimated just how much they'd already burned away. It was a cold Thursday evening when I heard the slam of car doors outside. I peered through the window and my stomach dropped. There they were. Mom, Dad, and Gina, each dragging a suitcase up the driveway like weary travelers returning from a long trip. Except they weren't travelers, they were trespassers. The pounding on my front door started immediately. "Flora, open this door right now." Dad's voice thundered thick with anger. Mom's voice followed sharp and frantic. "We know you're in there. Stop playing games and let us in." Then Gina, shrill and indignant. "This is our house. You can't keep us out, Flora." I sat on the couch, the deed sitting on the coffee table like a silent shield. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I didn't move. The pounding grew harder, rattling the frame. "Flora," Dad bellowed, "don't make me call the police. You can't lock us out of our own home." I finally stood, walked to the door, and called back through it, my voice steady. "This isn't your house anymore. The deed is in my name. You signed it over, remember." There was a pause. Then Mom's voice cracked, rising into hysteria. "We have nowhere to go. We sold everything to move to Florida, and now we're stranded with nothing but these 3 suitcases. Flora, please, at least let your mother inside." I closed my eyes, fighting the strange ache in my chest. For a split second, I pictured her tucking me in as a child. But then I remembered the letter, the stripped walls, the laughter in Florida. "No," I said flatly. "You made your choice." By then, neighbors had begun stepping onto their porches. Mrs. Johnson from next door walked over, her robe pulled tight around her shoulders. "Is everything all right over here?" she asked, concern wrinkling her face. These people are trying to break into my house, I answered loudly through the window. Mrs. Johnson looked confused. Flora, that's your mother. What's going on? It's complicated, I said, my voice colder now. But this is my house, and they're not welcome. The shouting escalated. Gina screamed until her voice cracked, accusing me of betrayal, calling me heartless. Dad kept pounding threatening lawsuits, promising he'd drag me to court. Mom alternated between sobbing and begging, her voice carrying down the street. Finally, I cracked the door open just enough to meet Dad's furious eyes. If you can afford a lawyer, I said evenly, then you're not as broke as you claim. Go ahead. I'll see you in court. His face went scarlet, his fist tightening at his side. For a moment, I thought he might try to force his way in, but then he stepped back. An hour later, after exhausting their pleas, threats, and screams, they finally gave up. I watched through the blinds as they loaded their suitcases into what looked like a rental car. The engine roared, headlights cutting across my lawn, and then they were gone. I stood in the darkness, my hands trembling, every muscle taut. The house was silent again, but it didn't feel peaceful. It felt like the calm after an earthquake where you know the ground could shift again at any second. The next morning, the phone rang. Aunt Patricia's voice greeted me, calm but pointed. Flora, your parents are staying with me for now. Gina's gone to her boyfriend's. They told me everything. I almost laughed. Everything. Or just their version. This is a complicated situation, she said carefully. Maybe you should consider letting them sell the house. They really are struggling. I cut her off. Patricia, let me give you some advice. If you ever leave town, make sure they don't try to sell your house too. Silence crackled on the line. That's a terrible thing to say, she whispered at last. Is it? I asked, my voice sharp as glass. Because 3 months ago, that's exactly what they were planning for me. She hung up without another word. I lowered the phone, slowly staring at the empty house around me. The message was clear. I was alone now, surrounded by family ties that had turned into ropes trying to strangle me. But I also knew something else. I wasn't backing down. 6 months have passed since that night on my doorstep. 6 months since the shouting, the suitcases, the slammed doors. My parents never sued me. I heard through the grapevine that they'd spoken to a lawyer, but when they learned how airtight the paperwork was and how expensive a case would be, they quietly dropped it. Instead, Mom turned to Facebook. Every week, a new cryptic post appeared on her page. Some children forget everything their parents did for them. Family means nothing to some people. Very sad. You think you know your kids until they stab you in the back. Her friends, oblivious to the truth, flooded the comments with sympathy. So sorry you're going through this. Praying for you. I never replied. Let them think what they wanted. Explaining myself would only feed their version of the story. Dad, I heard, was working at a car dealership now. Gina had taken a waitressing job after the business finally collapsed. Aunt Patricia passed along tidbits whenever she wanted to twist the knife, but I stopped listening. Their downfall wasn't my responsibility. Meanwhile, I built something new. The house. The same house I grew up in. The same house they tried to rip from me has become mine in a way it never was before. I painted the walls fresh colors, bought modest furniture that suited me, not them. The living room glows in soft blue now instead of that dull beige. The kitchen smells of coffee and cinnamon rolls instead of stress. I kept my apartment too, renting it out for extra income. Ironically, the rent covers most of the mortgage payment here. For the first time in my adult life, money feels like mine, not theirs. I've started saving, planning, even daring to dream about a vacation of my own, not a conference trip, but a real escape somewhere warm, somewhere no one knows my name. Some nights, though, the quiet in this house feels almost too heavy. I'll sit on the porch and remember the noise of my childhood dad's booming laugh, Mom's chatter on the phone, Gina blasting music from her room. For a fleeting second, I miss it. But then I remember the letter, the empty walls, the Florida photos with their smug smiles, and the ache hardens back into resolve. Because it wasn't just the money, it was the planning, the intent, the way they waited until I was out of town knowing what they were doing was wrong, hoping I wouldn't find out until it was too late. If they'd come to me honestly, said Flora, we want to sell and move, I might have listened. Maybe I would have agreed to split the money, maybe not. But at least it would have been a conversation, a choice. Instead, they chose deception. And I chose myself. People ask if I'll ever reconcile with them. The truth is, I don't know. Forgiveness requires trust, and they burned that bridge to ash. For now, I'm not waiting by the phone. I'm not hoping for an apology. What I have is peace. Cold, quiet, imperfect peace, but mine. I sit on the porch most evenings, the deed safely tucked away inside the house, bathed in sunset light. Neighbors wave as they pass, none of them knowing the battlefield this place once was. Sometimes I wonder what my parents tell people about me now. Do they call me selfish, heartless, maybe? But I've stopped caring. Because the truth I've learned is this blood alone doesn't make a family. Respect does. Trust does. And when those are gone, all that's left is survival. I'm 30 years old, and I've finally learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is close the door. Lock it and keep it closed, even if the people on the other side are the ones who raised you.